you guys did the work. You adopted Scrum, you adopted Kanban, you went out and hired coaches, you reorganized organizations into squads, you did retros, you did planning, you did the dailies, you invested in training, you brought in consultants, you might be consultants. You did the work, and delivery is still hard. And I don't think this is a team problem, and I don't think it's a coaching problem. I don't think it's a framework problem. And I think most of you already know that. You've been doing this long enough to know it's something else, and we can feel it. Teams are trying, practices are in place, the events are happening, and yet it's not really working. Because I think the constraint isn't where most people are looking. The constraint, I think, is the operating model. It's not the team, it's not the framework, the operating model, the organizational system that determines what is visible and who can decide and how fast the organization learns. The operating model determines how work flows from the idea to customer. It determines where authority sits, not just on the org chart, but actually in practice. And it determines how fast information travels and how fast decisions get made within the organization. It also determines whether learning actually influences direction or just produces some retrospective notes that sit in a SharePoint site somewhere and nothing happens with. If we have a well-designed operating model, it amplifies frameworks. Scrum, Kanban, DevOps work well inside an aligned operating model. If the operating model is misaligned, no framework can compensate for it. You can't sprint retrospective your way out of a structural problem. You can't daily stand up your way to a different decision rights in your organization. Now, it's worth noting that a sufficiently charismatic individual or group can buck that trend inside an organization. A department working together, a force of personality leader, they can show the way, they can demonstrate what's possible. But here's the thing, it doesn't stick. Things backslide to whatever the operating model in your organization makes easy. The system is optimized for that status quo. Larman's law, right? And it will reassert itself. I see this at customer after customer. A team is doing great work, but the operating model is constraining them. Through sheer force of will, they succeed and deliver value, but all it takes to backslide is one bad leadership hire, key folks to move on, or just exhaustion of trying to swim against the current. The teams are trying, the practices are still in place, the events are still happening, but the constraint is still there and things slowly revert back to defaults. Good people trapped in misaligned systems burn out, give up, or conform. System behavior dominates individual performance. So what do I actually mean by operating model? Because the term gets thrown around a lot, and I want to use a specific definition. And it's easy to confuse it with the delivery framework. An operating model is not Scrum. It's not safe. It's not a set of practices or ceremonies or a methodology that you can adopt. It's the organizational system within which all of those things operate. The framework is what your teams do. The operating model is what your organization allows. This distinction matters because if the operating model is misaligned, it does not matter how good your Scrum implementation is. The operating model is the constraint. The three things that I feel like are quite telling in this story are decision rights, right? Where decisions are made. governance and funding, how that's all organized, and flow of context and work through the system. So we're talking about value stream, but they're all inside of that idea of the operating model. The system within which the organization is operating, right?